Hello, and welcome to Navigating the Special Education System and the Need for Good Evaluations. My name is Rivka Weiner, and I'm the Director of Brooklyn School Age here at ADAPT Community Network. A couple of housekeeping rules. Please put any questions for the presenters in the Q&A. To ask a question, simply click on the Q&A icon towards the bottom of your screen, type your question, and hit send. The chat box will only be used to post information pertaining to ADAPT Community Network and this webinar. Information about how to access translation will be available in the chat. Please make sure your questions are general in nature, as this webinar will give general information only and will not address specific cases. In the interest of privacy, please do not include personal information. If you are having technical difficulties, there will be answers to shared questions in the chat section. This is being recorded, and you can watch it again online at www.adaptcommunitynetwork.org. Be sure to follow us on social media at AdaptWeChange. It is my pleasure to welcome you to today's session featuring Adrienne Arkentacki. Adrienne Arkentacki, founder and owner of the Arkentacki Law Group, has been practicing law for over 20 years, focusing on her practice on representing individuals with disabilities in special education matters and assisting families plan for the future and securing eligibility for government benefits such as OPWDD and Medicaid. Adrienne is committed to helping families navigate the challenging landscape of special education, focusing a portion of her practice on serving students from underserved communities. Adrienne understands both personally and professionally the challenges families face when caring for a loved one with disabilities. Adrienne Arkentacki has traveled the road of navigating the special education, special needs planning world personally. The mother of 3 incredible daughters, one with significant medical needs and developmental disabilities. The birth of her daughter Jordan in 1992, who is now a resident at the Center for Discovery, led Adrienne to pursue a legal career devoted to serving families of loved ones with disabilities. After graduating from law school, Adrienne committed to serving families of loved ones with disabilities, first as a Medicaid service coordinator in Westchester, New York, after law school as the pro bono project coordinator at a major law firm, and several long-term positions, ultimately as the vice president and managing attorney at a special education and special needs law firm with offices in New York and Pennsylvania. Please join me in welcoming Adrienne Arkentacki.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Rivka. I'm going to turn this over to Amanda Ford, who's our senior paralegal, who will share the presentation. First, I want to thank ADAPT, and I want to thank Maria for inviting me today. This is a topic very near and dear to my heart, and I cannot stress enough the importance of evaluations in navigating the world of special education. As Rivka mentioned, I have 3 daughters. I always tell this background for a purpose. My oldest daughter is a neonatal nurse and the mom of 2 twin boys who are going to be 2 next month. And then my middle daughter has significant disability. She's 32 and she lives at the Center for Discovery and went through the special education system in Westchester, New York. And her needs were very clear. So in some ways it was an easier road, although there were definitely challenges. And then I have a 26-year-old who is a stage manager in New York City. And she went through the special education system. And I always say, for families who are just starting this road, that there is a light at the end of the tunnel, because she had pretty significant challenges and has done amazingly well. And you can see her on our website. And so, but it took advocacy, and it took some really good evaluations and staying on the school district to really support her needs and really push her to become a self-advocate. So I want to talk a little bit about the world of special education for those of of you who are just starting this journey and really focus on the need for good evaluations. Amanda, can you click? So, I just joined a little while ago, and maybe you have been over some of this, but it is really important for families to understand what is required under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. And I will tell you, before I was an attorney, and again, I went to law school when my kids were small and knowing that they had special needs. So I went on the New York State Department of Education website before I was an attorney and downloaded or uploaded the regulations and sat and read through them. They are pretty family friendly and they are on the website in different languages. And I encourage families to look at them because, I always say this road, if you don't know what the law says, it's hard to navigate. It's like steering a ship with no compass or no rudder or whatever it's called. So you want to really start with the basics. And what the IDEA says is that it ensures under the law, both federal and state, that the states and the local school districts or the local education and agencies have to provide a free, appropriate public education for students with disabilities. Now, just remember, and if you take a few things away from this presentation, it doesn't mean the best education, and it doesn't mean the bottom of the barrel. It means something in between. It means something where the student will make progress that is really geared for that student's unique needs and circumstances. And the preference for providing these services is the least restrictive environment. That means that to the extent possible, a student is really kept in the local school district. All right, Amanda. So what's the purpose of the IDEA? And this is really important because I meet with families all the time that say, the district told me that none of this has to do with the academics. And as long as he's getting B's or A's, it doesn't really matter, okay, which is so untrue. And really what the spirit and the purpose of the IDEA says in the law is that it's to ensure that all children with disabilities have available to them a public education that emphasizes special education related services designed to meet their unique needs. But this is the important part, and prepare them for future education, employment, and independent living, all right? So what the IDEA, the purpose is to prepare our children for life outside high school. So even if they get an A in geometry, but they don't know how to, make change or get on a bus or fill out a job application, those are the important things. It's not only about, taking calculus. All right, Amanda. So one of the things you want to look at and that's very important when you're going to these meetings is the program of services tailored to the documented needs. And that's where the evaluations come in of the child. And a few of the red flags that we look for when we take on a case is, do we have outdated or missing evaluations? Are the assessments that are being done by the school district or even outside providers, are they inaccurate? Are the evaluations untimely or sometimes not even done? And when you look at an IEP, are the goals cut and pasted? All right. So you as parents and, if they're providers on here, you know these children best. So if it doesn't feel right, it probably isn't right. All right. I remember, and the reason I tell you about my children is that, I've been through this system and I remember reading the IEP for my daughter, Jordan, who is nonverbal, cortically blind, in a wheelchair, pretty medically fragile. And one of the goals is that she would stand and recite the Pledge of Allegiance. And I looked at the committee and said, you know, if she could do this, it would be a miracle and I would be so happy. But clearly, this goal was not meant for Jordan and probably just input into the system by mistake. So you really want to look at the IEPs and you want to see if everything on the IEP is really geared toward your child. All right, so what is the IEP? What is it supposed to do? It's supposed to really be a document and a contract between the parent and the school district that's reasonably calculated to enable the student to make progress, meaningful progress, not just minimal project. And that's one of the things that this Supreme Court case, Andrew F., really stood for in light of their circumstances, in light of their unique circumstances. It requires more than trivial progress, and it must be personalized to the student's unique needs. And it has to have sufficient support services to permit the child to benefit from these services. Okay, man. All right, so what are the sections? There's the classification and there's in the implementation date, which really should be immediately after the IEP is developed. The evaluative information is reviewed, and that brings us to the evaluations. There has to have a present level of performance, academic, physical, social, emotional, management needs. When you are at an IEP meeting or out here in the suburbs where I am right now, we call them CSE meetings. Remember that the plops, they go first, okay? Everybody wants to get to the punch of where is this child going to go to school, what the program is going to be. But if you don't have a good basis and you don't know where your child is, it's hard to go forward. All right, what are special factors that should be considered? A behavior plan, whether there is limited English proficiency, whether there's a visual impairment, whether there's a communication device needed or assistive technology. Okay, the other parts of the IEP are transition plans. Goals are really important, and the goals need to be measurable and meaningful. All right, IEP goal progress reporting to parents. What the law really says is that you need to get progress reports as often as you get report cards or, really report cards. So, I know we all want to get progress reports on a regular basis, but if you're not getting them, the easiest thing to do is to just call and schedule a meeting or ask for a written report of the progress. The other section are recommended programs, class size, accommodations, modification support, such as an assistive technology device or one-to-one para, modified work and breaks, and related services and their frequency, duration, and ratio. I want to make one point about the IEP meeting. And as I said before, because this is really important, the way an IEP meeting should really flow is that you should get present levels of performance. Then you look at the evaluations. And then you talk about related services and accommodations. And by the way, the accommodations that are included in an IEP are really included under Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act. It's a civil rights law. It is not a special education law. And as you may or may not know, under Section 504, students can get accommodations and not get special education services. So they can be separated. But it is very important for families to know that all students who receive special education services are entitled to protections under Section 504, but not all students that receive 504 accommodations may need or be eligible for special education services, because Section 504 is really a civil rights law that sort of levels the playing field. It says, I'm going to make these accommodations available so that you can access education the same way a non-disabled peer would access. Special education is different because it remediates these special education issues. So we want to talk about that. We may want to talk about transition services, participation in statewide assessments or alternate assessments. We want to talk about the availability of participation with students without disabilities. So we want to make sure that there's this availability so that the student with disabilities can really interact with their non-disabled peers. What about special education? And I know that's a huge issue in New York City, of which, is, by the way, a special education service, because if a student can't get appropriate transportation, how will they access education? And placement, where will the student make progress in the least restrictive environment? And if you take away just a few things from this presentation, remember that least restrictive environment does not always mean a public school in your community. It depends on the child. So, and one of the reasons I bring up my children is because Jordan could not access education in the local school. All right. So she went to what we call a BOCES program up in Yorktown Heights. For her, that was the least restrictive environment. Now, Jenna could access, she wasn't on alternate assessment. She could access all her education in the school district, in the public school, with accommodations and with special education services. And her classroom consisted of, she was in an ICT classroom, and it's different up in Westchester as it may be in the city, but that was her least restrictive environment. Okay, now let's get to what everybody really, I think, came here to listen to me talk about: evaluations. And when we were preparing for this conference, one of the things that Marie and I said to each other is evaluations are the core of the special education process. And the reason I say that, and I'll go back to this analogy, when you are driving, if you don't have a map, or now we have GPS and we have the nav systems, how do you know where you have to go? All right. And it really, really is important. I cannot stress to you how crucial it is to obtain good evaluations, whether it be initial evaluations or whether it be a reevaluation. But good evaluations will provide you with a guidepost as to where you want to go and what really are these, what are the challenges that your child is facing. Now, I'm going to give you sort of the what the districts are required to do, but that doesn't mean that that's all you should look at. So the initial evaluations come within 60 days of a parent signing a consent to evaluate. So I cannot stress, if you think that your child needs special education services, get the consent in, all right? Now, you still have to be careful of what you're signing. And, the lawyer in me says, have someone look at what you are signing to just make sure you're not waiving any rights. You're not saying, I give them a year to evaluate. The initial consent should be signed as soon as possible. And what areas should the school district, be evaluating in? Well, it's pretty comprehensive. It says that the district is required to evaluate in all areas of suspected disability. So if you're getting an initial evaluation consent form that says, oh, we're only going to do a social history, that in itself is going to be a red flag to you, all right? And you're going to say, wait a minute. No. I understand that my child should be evaluated in all areas of suspected disability. So if you have a student with speech and language delays, you still might need more than just the speech and language evaluation. It includes a social history, and maybe there's some physical disabilities. Well, then he needs a physical therapy evaluation. OT, he's having trouble writing or navigating his environment. Well, then he needs an OT eval. And you really want it to be comprehensive because you want a starting point, all right? So that's an initial evaluation, and that really goes through when you do these triennial evaluations, which are due every 3 years. And I strongly suggest to parents that you not waive the triennials. So you want to make sure that you really at least every 3 years, or if a situation is changing, request new evaluations, all right? And we're going to go on to talk about more of what the evaluations should really include and how they should guide you. So you get these evaluations. Say the school district does what they're supposed to do and they evaluate the student. And the initial evaluations are 60 days. I strongly recommend that parents don't hang your hat on that 60 a day and, go in with guns blazing and say, you didn't do this within 60 days. Work with the school district, but you also don't want to let this lag too long. So if you're at 65 days and you still don't have the evaluation, still don't have the meeting, really, really start to follow up. And you don't want it to go much longer, but again, you really want to facilitate a working relationship, get the evals done, and get back to the table to create this IEP, because that's what's important. The IEP, and this is what the law says, it must accurately reflect the results of the evaluations. And why? Why do we want these evaluations? Not just because the law says you're entitled to these evaluations. It's really in order to identify the unique needs of the students, establish annual goals related to those needs, and we want data to provide an appropriate educational and related services. So an appropriate education related services. So the evaluation by a qualified evaluator, okay? Now remember one thing about these evaluations. The school district in 99% of the cases gets what I call the first bite at the apple. They have the right to evaluate. Now, if you've had private evaluations, and I have, seen many, many private evaluations, which are extensive, which are incredibly helpful. Sure, you want to turn them over to the district, and maybe you say to the school district, look, if you want to take these evaluations and use them to create the IEP, please do so, because in all fairness, you don't want your child to have to be subjected to too many evaluations either. But I strongly recommend, if you have private evaluations, turn them over to the school district as soon as possible, so that maybe you can really prevent over evaluating. But again, we're doing this because we want data. I have a client outside of New York City, really having a young kid, really really struggling in school. And, there were some evaluations done, but really didn't get to the core of what the student's challenges were. I recommended a private evaluation because I felt like the evaluations were not extensive enough. They didn't make recommendations. And we'll talk a little bit about IEEs here. I'm looking at my time here. To make sure that the school district has good evaluations and good data. So what I did was I recommended a private evaluation, which they were able to get through insurance, and it was an easy road, but the private evaluation included a lot of information, recommendations, even frequency of services, which really gave a good guidepost to the school district. Now, I'll make one caveat about that. The school district does not have to take all those evaluations and take the recommendations, and they're not mandated to use the information to create the IEP, but what they are required to do is consider them. So what does that mean? Well, it means that they just can't say, oh yeah, we read them and we're not going to use anything. It really means that they have to show some sort of good faith in considering what this evaluation said, what it relied on, the data. And the reason that I say this, and again, for those of you who have heard me speak, I'm always building a case, the case that will never happen, because the best way to really facilitate a good IEP, and so you don't have to go and hire a lawyer, is really to um, make sure that the school district knows what the laws are and that they abide by them, and you stay on them and hopefully create a good IEP that they are going to implement. So again, the lawyer in me says sort of hold their feet to the fire, make sure that they are abiding by the law and really considering the documentation and the information from the evaluations. So what are some of the good evaluations that are, available, and how do you get them? So obviously a psychoeducational, a psychological evaluation. And I cannot stress the importance of a good neuropsych. The information that you can glean from it really gives you a snapshot of what that individual student needs. Um, a speech, an OT, a PT, an ABA assessment, feeding therapy, a feeding evaluation, because remember, and I want you to keep this in mind, keep the purpose of special education services in mind, to allow the student or to really facilitate the student in an independent life, in creating as independent a life as possible. And if he can't eat or he doesn't, he can't facilitate cooking and eating the food, then how can he really be independent? So the school district said, you know what, feeding therapy, a feeding evaluation is really not educational. Well, you can go back and say, of course it is, because it is one of really the core purposes of the IDEA, to create or teach a student how to be as an independent person as possible. Assistive technology, alternative communication for a student that perhaps is hearing impaired, or our students on the spectrum who maybe need AT but are extremely bright but need an alternate way of communicating. Visual visual evaluations, audiological evaluations, because remember that this is access to education, and a lot of these evaluations can provide information on how to facilitate access to education or supports that can provide the student with a way to make progress. One of the most crucial evaluations, an FBA, functional behavior assessment, and if needed, a behavior intervention plan. And remember that these evaluations are really, especially in FBA, they're supposed to evaluate the triggers. They're supposed to evaluate the challenges. Then the evaluations really should talk about what services can be provided in order to allow the student to make progress. And Amanda, just hold on before the next slide. What if you don't know what type of evaluation is needed? Well, one of the things you can do is, when a neuropsych or a psychoed, you can ask what other evals might give the information that will allow us to create a program for the student to make educational progress. So, you reach out to the providers, reach out to your pediatricians, reach out to any of the providers or evaluators that you're already using, okay? And then look at the other thing you can do is look at what the challenges are. So this little guy, he was having meltdowns in his class every day. And every day the classroom teacher was calling the mom and saying, like, pick him up at 2 o'clock. He's had enough. Like, that was the behavior intervention, is he's had enough, come and get him. Well, a good FBA is going to identify the triggers and create a program so that no one's calling and saying, pick up the student at 2 o'clock. So these are important. All right, Amanda, you can go to the next one. So, now we've gotten these evaluations. Hopefully they're giving you great information. Now, if you think that the evaluations that you're getting from the school district are really, you're like, this is not my kid, okay? I don't know what they're saying, but I don't feel like this is a good, i- you know, uh, this is not a good snapshot of who my child is. This is not identifying, his challenges. The other thing that happens, a red flag, is that the evaluator will say, I don't see anything where the mom is saying, "Oh, he has meltdowns," right? And mom or dad is saying, he comes home every day and he's throwing himself on the floor, and the evaluator says, "Well, I don't see that." So maybe then you have to say, "Well, come to the house because you'll see it in the home environment." And the other thing to remember is if the school district is saying to you, well, after this evaluation, the evaluator doesn't see any challenges, um, and it has nothing to do with education because everything's happening at home, go back to what we talk about. The purpose of the IDEA is not only for him to function in school without the meltdowns, it's to really generalize those skills and not have the meltdowns at home, because after he leaves high school, he will be faced with a community that doesn't have the protections of the IDEA. So you want to make sure that you go back and you say, he can't generalize the skills, even if you're doing the job there, or the evaluation says he's not having these meltdowns, he's having them at home, and you need to address that, because the purpose of the IDEA is to provide him with the skills so that at home he won't have the meltdowns, all right? Now, the evaluations, again, I'm going to say this many, many times, they are really the cornerstone, and they are the guidepost for everything else, such as annual goals. The annual goals must be tailored to the student's individual needs. They must be measurable, meaningful. In some ways, they can be academic if it's an academic goal or a challenge, and they must be functional, right? And you want in an evaluation for the evaluator to give some information on the goals and what they should be. And I will tell you, I can tell you that so many times the families come in and say the evaluators through the school district, or maybe through even independent evals, have said, it's not really our job to provide the goals, and it's not our job to provide the frequency of services. I think it's their ethical obligation for the evaluators to provide this information, because who's better to do it than the evaluator? A lot of times these evaluators will say, well, we're going to leave that to the CSE. The CSE is a committee to really look at the information. They are not the ones that evaluated the students. So I want you to go back when you're looking at your evaluations and preparing for your CSE or IEP meetings, to make sure and push the evaluators to the extent possible to include proposed goals, to propose frequency of services. And I know probably I can't see everybody, but I'm sure you're saying they're never going to do that. Well, I'm going to give you an option if you run into that problem. Okay. again, these are just some of the things that you want to talk about and that you really want to talk about with the evaluators. Talk about present levels of performance, express your concerns. How is progress to be measured? Make sure that the evaluations, and you're having this dialogue and this narrative with the evaluators. Ask them, how's progress to be reported to the parent? What is going to help the student progress? And you want to look at, does the IEP include annual goals for all the areas of need? And are annual goals from year to year the same, different? Because then you have another problem. Go ahead. Okay. You take the evaluations, hopefully they're good. You go to the CSE meeting. You want to make sure that you meaningfully participate in these meetings and that there's an opportunity to review the evaluations. Okay, this is really important. So say you get the evaluations done and now you're waiting for your CSE or IEP meeting, and the night before the IEP meeting or the CSE meeting, all of a sudden you get the evaluations at 11 o'clock at night. Well, that is really not appropriate because you need time to review and really decipher the information. Now, I understand in New York City, I do hundreds of cases in New York City, that, the push to have these meetings is really hard, and they'll send the evaluations or they'll give you the evaluations the day of the meeting. My suggestion to you is to either say, I need to reschedule this in the next few days, in order to, have a chance to look over these evals, or hold the meeting and on the record indicate you just got the eval, you haven't had a chance to really review it, to comment on it. You can't meaningfully participate right now, and so you're going to table the meeting, but you want something very soon. And these are things that are actionable. If the DOE or a local school district is not doing it, they really are supposed to be held accountable for this, all right? But you need to take time in order to really look at the evals and have somebody else look at them. And always, by the way, always bring someone with you to the meeting, whether it be a friend, whether it be, a colleague. I mean, in my own IEP meetings, my own CSE meetings, I always brought someone. And it couldn't be my husband because he had to work and we had to go in person in those days, but I always brought someone because it can be a little intimidating. All right. Again, these are just some points, and we're going to talk about after this an IEE. But the Committee on Special Education, the important thing is that it is a committee, and you as the parent are an important part of it. It should be a special education teacher, a general ed teacher, the related service providers. Invite people who you think it's important, especially the evaluators who prepared those evals, the representative of the school district, and anyone you want to invite who has knowledge of or special expertise. Okay, I'm gonna skip this, Amanda, because I want to really get to the IEEs. Parent preparedness. Parents should be informed, involved, and effective in safeguarding your children's educational rights. One tip I can tell you from all the cases that we do, the first thing we do is we obtain the educational records, especially the evaluations, because I want to understand not only what the parents' concerns are, I want to understand what evaluators really see as the students' challenges. All right, I want the written communication with the school. But these evaluations are important because, again, they will provide crucial information on creating this program. And absolutely, the other thing is to exercise your language rights. I hope I'm speaking slow enough for the translator. But if you feel more comfortable in another language, exercise your rights. And that includes getting the evaluations translated. That is important. And it doesn't mean there's no test as to um, whether you can understand something in English. I've had many clients who can speak English, but they are much more comfortable in their native language, and they should have a translator at the IEP meeting, because again, it goes back to, can you really meaningfully participate in the evaluation process, in the CSE process, and developing the IEP if you can't really understand the language?
I'm sorry,
What are,
Adrian, excuse the interruption. Just we have about 5 minutes before we'll start taking some questions.
okay,
So if everyone wants to start submitting their questions into the Q&A.
okay, great. I want to talk, so you know what? I want to talk about what happens in the time left if you disagree with the education evaluations that are done by the school district, okay? Because it's really important. Typically, and not always, the evaluations that are done through the school district are pretty generic. All right, they're going to, because remember, and I'm not sticking up for anybody, but there are massive amounts of students that need these evaluations. All right, so the evaluators are overwhelmed. There are not enough of them. They do the evaluations. They've been told don't make recommendations. They probably have been told, you know, you only have this amount of time, write it up quickly. They have 50 evaluations behind them. You get that evaluation, or maybe you don't get the evaluation. But in either case, if you disagree with the evaluation or you don't get it, you have the right to an independent educational evaluation. And the way that it's supposed to work, and I could do a whole seminar on this, is that you write a letter, or you say at the CSE meeting, or you say to the CSE chair, I disagree with this evaluation. It's not comprehensive enough. It doesn't properly identify the needs of my child. There's no recommendations, there are no goals. I'm asking for an independent educational evaluation. All right. The district has two routes they can take. They can either approve the evaluation with little or no strings attached. That doesn't mean giving you a list of evaluators to use. It means they say to you, okay, you can use this evaluator. We will pay up to this amount. Now, it's got to be a reasonable amount. It can't be a neuropsych for $500. That's effectively denying the evaluation. Or the other thing they can do, and this is why I think it's important for you to speak to someone before you go down this route, especially outside New York City, they can take you to hearing to defend their own evaluation. Typically in New York City, they don't do it, but it can happen. So, but the benefit of an IEE is that you're getting an independent person that has really no ties to the school district. And that's why it's important sometimes to really look at what lists they're sending you. That evaluator is definitely going to take a deep dive into what the challenges of a student are. And when you get these IEEs, you will get phenomenal, in most cases, information that will really be, again, the cornerstone, or the floor of creating a good IEP. So I know, let's see, it's about 2:13. I'm going to leave some time for questions. The takeaways from here are, again, the evaluation process is crucial. Don't sideskip it. Don't think, I don't need these evaluations. You as the parent, or we as parents, because I've been down this road, we're the ones that know our children's challenges the best. If it doesn't feel right, it probably isn't right. Know your rights, okay? And as parents, just make sure you are on top of the school district. Make sure that you're getting these proper evaluations and building from there. Um, with that, I'll take any questions that come up. Oh, and this is my contact information. The one thing I'll say, Rivka, I'll end with this. As everyone knows, I'm not great about phone calls because I'm all over the place. But if you have a question after that, my contact information is here. Amanda Ford is on here. She's sort of the keeper of the keys for the Arkansas Law Group. And I'm happy to entertain any questions.
All right, thank you so much, Adrian. So we do have a few questions coming in. So the first question is a little bit of a two-part one. How can one obtain a neuropsychological evaluation if they're unable to pay for it, if the district is not willing to approve it?
Okay, so you have to file a hearing request. Typically, I mean, this is, and again, you said it best. These are general answers, all right? So the way it usually works is that you ask the district to approve the neuropsych and they say no, okay? Or they don't answer. You have to file a hearing request in almost all the cases in New York City, and you give an evaluator. Now, the other thing is you can go to the evaluator, and some of them will do this. They will wait for prospective funding, which means that you don't have to lay out the money up front if they know that you're litigating the issue. Some of them will do it. All right. The other thing I tell families is try to go to your insurance also and see if there is a portion of the evaluation that they will pay, because litigation is not easy, all right? And it can be long, and in New York City it can be involved. So, I'm not the attorney that's going to tell you to go in there just to fight. So try the insurance first, try Medicaid sometimes. Um, you know, uh, but in many instances, you have to file a hearing request. And the one thing I didn't get to, Rivka, which I really want to stress, is that parents think that, they can only hire an attorney if they have money and they can plunk down these retainers. Many attorneys, not only us, and this is not a sales pitch from my firm at all. There's a fee shifting provision, which means that if you prevail at hearing, the district has to reimburse the attorney's fees. It's not dollar for dollar, and it's not easy to do, but it's available because there should be equal access to justice. It shouldn't just be families who, can pay up front. But the long-winded answer is, the short part of it is sometimes you have to file for hearing.
All right, thank you for that. The next question is, at what age should one obtain a neuropsychological? Is there an age that is like too young, or should they wait till a certain age, such as
No,
5?
that is such, people are misguided on that. I've had, I have a few evaluators who will do them at 3 or 4. I'm not an evaluator. I always say this, that, I rely on really good people that we trust to do the evaluations, and I've seen them done for 3 or 4-year-olds. I just think the testing that they're gonna do is gonna be different, but and what are you looking for? That's what's important is, do you need a full neuropsych? Do you need a psychological? And a good evaluator is not just going to say, oh, well, I'll do everything. They're going to be able to tell you, just like when I said, if you don't know what evaluations you need, a good evaluator will be able to tell you that.
All right, thank you. The next question that we have is, how does one rule out autism? And is the ADOS assessment required for an autism evaluation?
Well, I think they're different. Now, what I'm going to say is I am not an evaluator. I am an attorney, okay? And so what I would say is go to the evaluator, and see there are different assessments for autism. Some of them are clinical assessments. The ADOS is a good one, and it's one that has been, used forever. but it's not, the end all. Because sometimes they do the assessment and they wait a little bit of time, and these red flags that come up kind of resolve themselves. So I would say ask the evaluator if there's some alternatives also.
Okay, great. What would the benefits be of bringing an advocate or a lawyer to the IEP or CSE meetings? You mentioned it's always good to have someone with you. Would that just be like a friend, or would it be better to be bringing your lawyer to these meetings?
All right, here's what I'm gonna say. Lawyers don't belong at, I'm being honest with you, I don't think they belong at CSE meetings unless you're implementing a hearing officer's order, or you've got to a point where you've tried everything else and nothing works. Because bringing a lawyer to an IEP or a CSE meeting really kicks it up a level, and a lot of times it puts the district's backs against the wall. And so, what I say to parents is, it should be your like last line of defense. Advocates are another issue, because once you bring a lawyer, the district is going to send a lawyer. And in some cases, it becomes just, like a fighting match back and forth. But when I say bring someone, I really mean, especially if it's like your first CSE meeting, bring a friend, bring your husband, bring your sister, bring your mother, bring somebody just that can listen also. And I don't know if this question comes up, Rivka, but people ask me, should I record the meetings, right? Should I record the CSE meetings? And you'll get some attorneys who would say, absolutely, you should record every meeting and you don't have to tell them. That's not me. First of all, I have no problem with you recording the meetings. If you tell the school district that you're entitled to record them. You say to them, listen, I'm telling you so that you can get your recording, device in order, or I'll share it with you. And today I actually use, sometimes when our families record the meetings, there's a very simple app. It's like iTranscribe or something that I've used. And you can even get a transcription. So, my advice, and you'll get different advice, is, only take an attorney if, everything else fails and there's some unique reason.
All right, and our last question for the day is, how does your law firm plan to help families in their planning for the future as their children do get older?
Oh, yeah. We run a holistic law firm, all right? So it means that we look at everything. We look at the special ed issues. If you come for a consult, and all our consults are done virtually, by the way, we talk about planning as far as estate planning, special needs estate planning, making sure that you understand what the public benefits are, what happens when an individual or a student turns 18, right? Because they're emancipated adults. So do you need guardianship? Do you need advanced directives, supported decision-making? So we talk about everything, and I always say to families, even if you don't hire us, and every attorney I believe should do this, you will have a good guidepost as to what you should be doing in the future. But it is never too early to plan, because I've been doing this a long time, and I see sort of the things that can go wrong. So we look at everything, especially special needs estate planning. It's really important.
All right. Thank you all for joining us today. Following the conclusion of the event, you will receive an email with a survey link. Please complete for your chance to win an Amazon gift card. I hope you can join us at our 2:30 session for understanding benefits, qualifications, and how to apply. Thank you so much, Adrian.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. And again, if you have any other questions, just feel free to email me. Have a great day.